The earth rumbles as a T-14 Armata tank rolls across the former Ukrainian border. A squad of Russian soldiers sits on its roof, guns resting half-forgotten across their laps. They chat idly, gently bumping along the road, swerving to avoid burnt-out vehicles and landmine craters. Out here, they're miles from the front line. For the first time in months, they're able to properly relax. No Ukrainian troops anywhere close. Even if they were, what could they possibly do? The Russians are sitting on top of a $7 million killing machine, 55 tons of reinforced steel with guns that could rip through just about anything. And underneath them growls an engine big enough to power 3 Ferraris. It's so loud they can hardly hear each other talking. And that's why it's such a surprise when just a couple of seconds later the entire squad is dead and the $7 million tank grinds to a halt and slides into a ditch. 16 kilometers away, nestled safely in an underground shelter, a Ukrainian soldier takes his VR goggles off and fills up a fresh cup of coffee. He scans the skyline out of his tiny window, concern etched across his face. Those Russian soldiers never saw the drone that killed them. It had been hovering several dozen feet above their heads for the last half mile. Not much bigger than a raven, it had been getting ready to drop a precision explosive on their heads. Almost a dozen men, along with millions of dollars worth of machinery, were destroyed in an instant by a drone you could buy off the shelf for almost nothing. It's safe to say that war will never be the same again. At first glance, you'd be forgiven for thinking that warfare in Ukraine had regressed. Russian and Ukrainian soldiers are dug in. They cling tightly to positions that they have fought hard to take control of. It'll take even more to take those positions back. Fortifications and defenses are paramount. In many ways, it feels reminiscent of the trenches in World War I. But the reality couldn't be any more different. The war in Ukraine has fundamentally changed warfare forever. New technologies, instant real-time information, unimaginably precise ranged weapons, AI and consumer-level tech have all transformed each strategic front in the war. If conflict has changed this much in the last few years, it's hard to imagine how it will look over the next 100 years. So let's take a deep dive into the technologies reinventing the battlefield in Ukraine, starting with the advancement that has captured the most headlines over the last 2 years: drones. Prior to the war, Ukraine had a blossoming drone scene. Filmmakers and racers alike were getting into the DIY world of FPV or first-person view drones. Once an enthusiast hobby, you would often homemake a drone using cheap parts bought online or 3D printed yourself. 4 motors each powering a little motor with a camera feeding live video into a small VR headset. Put one of these on and it really did feel like you were flying. Little did any of these enthusiasts realize that their garden project was about to become central to the survival of Ukraine. For centuries, armies have always struggled with seeing over the next hill. You can see the battlefield in front of you, but how do you know what's behind the next hill? Is there a supply depot, a whole battalion of reinforcements, or an empty field? In World War I, just a few years after the invention of the plane, the first one was used in warfare. It was November 1st, 1911. Italy and the Ottoman Empire were locked in a stalemate, and so one budding Italian pilot took to the skies in his canvas-winged monoplane. He couldn't fly very far or fast. The top speed of the machine was only 45 miles per hour, but for the first time, an army was able to conduct aerial reconnaissance. The Italians knew where key strategic locations were, roughly. They were going off one man's memory and a sense of direction, but it was intel never seen before. Then they had the bright idea of sending him back up into the air, but this time armed with 4 hand grenades to drop on the heads of those soldiers. These first missions changed warfare forever. Since then, we've had over a century of arms racing with billions of dollars poured into one-upping the other side's technology. It's brought us into an era of orbiting satellites, stealth bombers, million-dollar unmanned drones, and fighter jets that can level buildings before they can even be seen by the naked eye. And yet, it's not the expensive technology that's changed the battlefield in Ukraine, it's the cheapest. The attack drones pioneered by the US Air Force cost millions of dollars, need runways and air bases, as well as teams of mechanics and commanding officers, all for them to come slightly too close to enemy guns they hadn't spotted and get shot out of the sky. These tiny FPV drones that used to be just an enthusiast's hobby are now the most lethal aerial threat in Ukraine. They're so cheap that the military can buy hundreds of them in bulk for less than the cost of one soldier's yearly salary. They can take off and land anywhere, fly low, and are so small that the anti-air weapons designed to down fighter jets don't have a hope of hitting them. Not only can the Ukrainians now see over the next hill, as it were, they can see over every hill across the whole country with inch-accurate GPS data. They can pinpoint the precise location of strategic targets anywhere and everywhere and can have an effective range of up to 20 kilometers, meaning the pilots don't need to get anywhere close to the fighting. Load them up with 10 pounds of explosives and they can take out a tank, a radio mast, a room full of troops without ever putting a single life at risk, all for just a few $100s. The results are mixed. Some estimate that 50% of these unmanned drone strikes are a success. Footage of drones carrying explosives that blow up mid-flight or that fail to detonate entirely have been shared online. In one video, a Ukrainian drone crashed into a Russian vehicle's windshield but failed to detonate. Only the most experienced pilots can take down a tank, and even then it can take up to 10 strike attempts to succeed. Because these drones are so small and light, the heavier the explosives they are carrying, the shorter their range becomes, limiting them to less than 10 kilometers a lot of the time. But for just $400, this technology is in its infancy. Over the course of the war alone, it's gotten much more effective with each passing month. In a decade's time, who knows how much the consumer drone technology will have advanced? That 50% success rate will creep up higher and higher with each passing year. And the fruit of the investment into drones is undeniable. In 2022, the Russian flagship in the Black Sea sunk after being hit by 2 small missiles in the middle of the night. The ship had been the crown jewel of the Russian Navy with 510 crew on board. In 2024, the Sergei Kortov, a Russian patrol ship, suffered a similar fate at the hands of drones. And this has done more than just allow Ukraine to conduct targeted strikes. It's eliminated much of the fog of war from the battlefield. Secrets are much harder to keep now. Everybody can know where everybody else is at any given moment. A convoy of supply trucks can't sneak their way south even if they are miles away from enemy troops. A group of soldiers setting up an ambush in the woods can be spotted at any moment by a drone half a mile away. If you're not in cover, then you are not safe. Which leads us perfectly to our next topic: artillery. Let's wind back to the 20th century to a fictional battlefield. You've just had a recon plane fly overhead and inform you that there is a massive supply depot 20 miles from your position on the other side of the front line. You know fairly precisely where it is, and you've got access to the best dumb artillery currently available, again costing millions of dollars. So you do the calculations, adjusting for what you assume the wind speed is, and fire. The recon plane tells you that you missed. The wind must have changed the trajectory. You fire again, and again, and again, until you finally hit the target. This is how it's been for decades. Even when you know where the enemy position is, hitting it from such a long distance is essentially a game of luck. Until now. The mantra in Ukraine is now one shot, one kill. Thanks to the drones, along with the other advances in radar and targeting, you can line up your shot with much more accuracy, but it goes further than that. The dumb artillery that was used before was called that because once it was in the air, it was in the air. You couldn't adjust its course or correct for any changes. With modern missiles you can. Ukrainian forces have been using the American-made Excalibur shells, which use GPS data alongside their own Kvitnik shells, which use a laser guidance system. These shells with the correct targeting data can take out a Russian tank, building, or group of troops from long distances with just one shot. No more need for endless inaccurate shelling. One shot, one kill. This efficiency brings the costs right down and makes combat encounters much quicker, minimizing casualties. The US has shipped a number of M7 Bradley Fire Support Team vehicles to Ukraine to help with this very approach. These aren't your standard tanks. Instead, they are packed full of advanced targeting systems capable of rapidly identifying multiple targets at the same time. Even while under fire, on the move, and defending themselves with their 25mm gun, the B-fists can mark multiple targets for long-range artillery to take out. One shot, one kill. Imagine where this technology will go. Picture a small drone hovering over the battlefield, marking targets with precision. Weapons that essentially behave like hackers in a Call of Duty lobby, aiming themselves instantaneously at enemies and firing before they have a chance to get to cover. Cluster missiles which split off at the last moment into a dozen individual homing shells capable of taking out a group of guards in a room full of hostages. A swarm of attack drones, all powered by AI systems that operate as one cohesive unit, with or without a pilot, and attack their targets like a swarm of bees. What was once science fiction is now virtually on our doorstep, and it will only get cheaper and more accessible over time. On the topic of science fiction, we couldn't talk about the advancements in battlefield technology without talking about the biggest one of them all, which has only just started to make its presence known: AI. Unlike a new kind of explosive or vehicle, AI is not confined to one part of the war. It is and will continue to pervade every aspect of it. As the joke goes, military generals don't have a clue what AI is, but they want to buy it by the barrel. Let's look at some examples. AI has been massively helpful behind the scenes in one of the most important but least talked about aspects of warfare: logistics. Supply chains are vital to winning a war. If a tank runs out of fuel, it's dead in the water. If soldiers don't get fed, they'll die. If you have one day to get hundreds of reinforcements from one side of the country to another, you need your logistics to be as efficient as humanly possible. Any inefficiency will cost lives. And if there's one thing that AI is good at doing, it's making things efficient. Machine learning is capable of taking mammoth tasks like feeding an entire army that are simply too big for one person to keep in their head and process the entire workflow at lightning speed, seeing the whole big picture all at the same time in a way that the human brain just can't. Ukrainian forces have been deploying AI to make their supply chain run as efficiently as possible, saving time and freeing up manpower for other important tasks. But it's so much more important than just that. On the ground, forces have been using AI technology to scan the faces of corpses and identify the dead bodies. In the past, this simply wouldn't have been possible, but now on the ground, soldiers with nothing more than a smartphone are able to know exactly who has been killed there and then, an invaluable piece of intelligence. Away from the battlefield, we have seen AI being used by Russia as part of their propaganda campaign. When terrorists attacked a show in the Moscow concert hall in 2024, despite the Islamic State claiming responsibility, Russian news outlets took the opportunity to spin the attack against Ukraine. Airing footage of a Ukrainian interview, they used AI technology to doctor the audio. The footage they used had nothing to do with the attack, but they made it seem as if the Ukrainian presenter said, "It's fun in Moscow today. I think it's a lot of fun. I'd like to believe that we will arrange such fun for them more often." As generative AI technology leaps ahead of itself every year, with new iterations further blurring the line between what's real and what's generated, this is undoubtedly going to be used as a major propaganda tool in the future. Now you cannot even trust recorded video footage or a person saying or doing something which was once fairly reliable. The definition of truth can now be bent to whatever agenda those in power have. Digital warfare in general is only going to become more and more prominent. Over the course of the war in Ukraine, there has been an ongoing invisible war raging behind the scenes. Russian and Ukrainian hackers have been at each other's throats for the last couple of years, fiercely defending their own systems from attacks while looking to crack open chinks in their opponent's armor. This war has marked arguably the first Internet of Things attack in a major war. Ukrainian hackers were able to get into Moscow's electric car charging grid temporarily. Charging stations across Russia's capital were suddenly displaying messages of support for Ukraine and damning criticisms of Vladimir Putin. Users could no longer plug in and charge their electric vehicles. Whilst this hasn't exactly turned the tide of the war, it has been an omen of what's to come in future wars. A group of renegade hackers in Ukraine were able to temporarily bring down a key piece of Russian infrastructure. What could a more organized, better prepared, and equipped hacking force do in the future? We rely on technology in virtually every aspect of our everyday lives. What if all of Russia's card machines went offline? What if their traffic lights went haywire? What if their state-run news outlets were taken over? What if Russia's government IT system was cracked? In the past, we've seen countries' healthcare databases held for ransom, crippling hundreds of hospitals. As quantum computers capable of cracking even the highest levels of encryption creep closer and closer and AI becomes more powerful, we're going to be seeing this invisible side of the war become more prominent year on year. But there's another side to this digital warfare too, and one that has massively transformed Ukraine's strategy: OSINT, open source intelligence. Ukraine have been able to comb through and harvest the open source intelligence from civilians across Ukraine, as well as hapless Russian soldiers. All of the cell phones and social media accounts in the country have now turned into a vast and thorough spy network. Gigabytes and gigabytes of OSINT have flooded the world, with analysts combing through all of the details to identify enemy positions, equipment, strategies, and more. As soon as the war started, millions of people across the world started carefully studying footage and posts shared online against real-world GPS data and other open sources of information. Every photo, video, message, or email coming from the region could shed light on the bigger picture of what was actually happening. This has turned the tables on the international stage in a way that Putin was not expecting at all. He has always relied on false narratives to twist reality to fit his own agenda, but with the bountiful amounts of OSINT available from this war, his claims are easy to disprove. Before Russia even invaded, as they were gathering forces near the Ukrainian border, Putin claimed to the international community that he was simply responding to an emergency. In decades prior, it would have been his word against Zelensky's, as journalists would rush to try and corroborate which facts they could. With OSINT, it was evident right away that he was lying. His troops were there preparing to invade. This immediately undermined his credibility to the observing countries before the war had even started. Every claim since then has been fiercely scrutinized and fact-checked using the wealth of OSINT available, which has just exposed lie after lie. Contrast this with Ukraine's figurehead Volodymyr Zelensky. Before the war, Zelensky wasn't very well known globally. Some knew him as the president that used to be a comedian, but that was about as far as his reputation extended. But during the war, Zelensky has used social media and the internet expertly to comprehensively win the like war. He has painted a picture of himself on the internet that's inspiring and human, fiercely independent and moral. In doing so, he has humanized the Ukrainian people to the wider world and garnered a lot of international support for his cause. In previous generations, he likely wouldn't have been able to have much of a platform for his voice to be heard, but with such easy access to the internet and a talented communications team, he became the Time magazine Person of the Year. This may not seem like such a big deal in the face of soldiers dying in a war until you think of the economic impact that it's had on Russia. Never before have we seen so many brands very publicly pull out of a warring nation. Since the start of the war, over 1,000 major companies have voluntarily reduced their services in Russia or pulled out entirely. Apple, Google, McDonald's, Nike, Amazon, Disney, pretty much any company that you could name off the top of your head has voluntarily decided to screw Russia over. This would not have happened without the internet. These businesses are here to make profits. We all know that, but a key part of making a profit is having good PR. When it became a good PR move to leave the Russian market and a bad move to stay in, they all jumped straight to Twitter to announce their decisions. That whole side to the war is something we've never really seen before, but it's likely to continue being a key battleground in future conflicts. But at its core, war never changes. T.R. Fehrenbach, a famous historian, once said that you may fly over a land forever. You may bomb it, atomize it, and wipe it clean of life. But if you desire to defend it, protect it, and keep it for civilization, you must do this on the ground, the way the Roman legions did, by putting your soldiers in the mud. Warfare is undoubtedly going to look very different from this point onwards. Pandora's box has been opened in terms of AI, drone attacks, and digital warfare. But at the end of the day, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is being fought as wars always have, to take land. At the start of this video, we compared Ukraine today to the trenches of the First World War, and that's a perfect way of seeing how, despite the strategies changing, the core approach remains the same. Ukrainians are holding onto their land with soldiers stationed in position. Russia is looking to take those positions and put their own soldiers there instead. No matter how complicated conflicts get with advanced precision shells, OSINT data flooding the internet, and drones dropping crude explosives on soldiers' heads, this will always be the way it's fought and won. That is, of course, until AI robot soldiers replace people and we start fighting our wars with killer androids, but thankfully we're not there quite yet. As we can see, the war in Ukraine has fundamentally changed the landscape of modern warfare. From consumer drones to advanced AI, the battlefield will never be the same again. But what does this mean for the future of global conflicts? How do you think advancements in drone technology will shape future wars? Could AI-driven warfare reduce human casualties, or will it lead to more devastating conflicts? Share your thoughts in the comments below.